All right, we're back. Talk Like No One's Listening podcast, episode 20. We made it to 20, so here we go. Today is the first time that I'm going to try to talk specifically like somebody is listening. And I can tell you that I automatically feel at least 37% more nervous about that and insecure about what I'm about to say because I never do this with the script. It's so much easier when I just used to think nobody was listening. It's funny. I've already done this intro probably about 10 times that you don't know that I just started and I erased it and I started over again because, yeah, shit's awkward. So here we go. Today's episode, let's call it, How Do You Mix? And my answer to that question is, I don't know. End of episode. Thanks for listening. Check you next time. But really, that is the question for people that are professional engineers working in the music industry, that you get asked this question a lot, or questions like that from people that are, of course, on the outside wanting to learn how to get in. And it's I don't know, the biggest question, one of the biggest questions you could ask about music production and making records and things like that. Because my answer, being that I don't know, should let you know that maybe it's not an answer that you will ever actually fully know. It's never ending, I feel like, because there's no end to it. I mean, yes, obviously there are good mixers. There are good mixing engineers in this world that collectively have figured out methods and techniques of being able to do it, to make great records, great mixes. But I don't think there will ever be any final definitive answer to how you do that, because it always changes based on so many things. It changes depending on genre, changes based on technology, what's available to you, changes based on just even culture and society, what people are into and what they want to hear. It changes based on just people being people and not wanting to do the same thing over and over again, like me. So when I sit down, wow, barking dogs outside. Anyways, when I sit down to start a mix, whenever I'm given the opportunity to do so, and I sit down and I open up the session and I'm starting to get organized and I'm importing tracks and I'm listening down and I'm getting just the whole song downloaded into my head and I'm starting to just try to figure it out what I'm going to do. I don't ever really fully know. I have certain things that I'll repeat. I have a template, maybe. I have certain general ideas of techniques and things that I'll do to certain instruments and vocals and whatnot. But basically, the journey from the start to finish is something that I never know how it's going to work out. And I prefer to keep it that way because each song I like to think of and consider as its own person and personality. So you don't know what it is until you get into it and you start to dissect the song and get an understanding of who the song is and understand who does this song want to be? Who is it meant to be? And then maybe start trying to figure out a path to get to that point of where the final mix of the song is the best representation of who and what this song is. That might be deep because some songs just, that might be too deep because some songs aren't deep, obviously. But if you are mixing a song that's a good song, it's well written, well performed, well recorded, well produced, then it deserves to be mixed and mastered and finalized properly that does it justice. So I had this topic on my head. Jesus. I had this topic on my mind recently. Somebody had asked me about someone had asked me if I would be able to sit down with them sometime and show them around like how to mix and show them what I do and give them a rundown. And I thought about it in the moment, talking that to the person, that I realized for myself, I remember back when I was new to working in music. I was maybe a year or two in. I'd gone to school, got an internship, worked my way up to become an assistant engineer / main engineer at a studio. And I was working, I had clients, and I was on my way. But I can remember back to that time when a couple times I was hired to do a mix. And I honestly didn't know what I was doing. Like, I didn't even know what a good mix is, or even what it really means to mix a song. I was going through the motions of what I assumed people do. I mean, some things things that I had seen other people do when I would be an assistant for somebody at the studio and they were mixing. And I would just remember watching them, like being a kid and watching your parent do something and then you just try to mimic it. That's all I was doing. And luckily at that time I was mixing for people that didn't know any better, so it worked out. But I flashed back to that in my head as this person was asking me if I could teach them some things about mixing. And I realized whatever I would even tell this person right now, it probably won't even really like sink in. Because if you're asking how to mix, then you have to ask yourself, what does that even mean? What does that mean to you when you say mix a song? What are you trying to do when you say you're doing that? If you don't have, maybe there's no right or wrong answer, but if you don't have just somewhat of a decent or like reasonably thought out answer to that, then I don't know if you even have a good starting point to try to like learn. And another thing that I thought about was that it takes years for your ears to be trained enough to be able to hear the small little details that you need to be able to hear in order to get to that final mix. Because that's what it really all comes down to, is you start with these broad strokes, doing all these general changes and adjustments to a song when you're mixing it, getting the volume levels right, getting panning, basic amount of how much reverb and delay effects and things like that you'll use, general EQ. I mean, a lot of that might be already dialed in from when you get a song from somebody, when it's already been like produced out and it's ready to mix. probably it's a good amount of those this broad stroke decisions have already been made, most of them. So what it comes down to is doing the small, subtle adjustments. And those are the hardest ones to make because they are subtle. But when they all add up, that last 5-10% of adjustments to a song of mixing are the ones that really take it over the top, that take it from being from okay to good to great, depending on how well you can do it. And to even be able to like operate to where you can hear what's going on at that level, at that microscopic level, that only comes from practice and hours of listening and listening and listening as hard as you can, as actively as you can, to be able to hear the smallest little differences, be able to hear half a dB volume change in a vocal, to hear that loud and clear, to be able to hear when you put on a tube compressor on an instrument or a vocal, to honestly be able to hear what that compressor sounds like. What makes that compressor sound like that one and not something else. For many years, I didn't know. I couldn't hear that stuff. I just assumed from what I had learned from other people and hear what I heard other people talking about. And I was just following the leader. Whatever I heard everyone else talking about that was more experienced than me, I just took that as, oh, well, that's what it is. That's the answer. And the first few mixes that I did, I was doing them based off of, some type of template thing that I'd seen other guys do. And I just tried to just steal it from them and copy it. And I had realized after a few years of working that way, when I would look at templates that I was using, both for recording and for mixing, I would have these elaborate chains of plugins for vocals and instruments that, like I said, I just had copied from somebody else. And I had realized bit by bit, plugin at a time, that I didn't even know what these plugins were doing or what the point was, or why specifically was this chain of plugins doing what I thought it was going to do. When I would stop and really think about it and analyze it and go through each plugin one at a time and listen to them and A/B them, bypass them on and off one at a time, and really listen to what effect are they actually having on the signal. And as I did that, I realized one at a time that I was taking the plugins off because they didn't really do anything for me that made it seem like it was an improvement. And then I realized, oh shit, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just guessing. I'm assuming. I'm just wearing this hat that says I know how to mix, or I know what I'm doing. I know how to engineer. And that was the beginning for me. I've been doing this maybe 10, 11 years now, and it was about around halfway through, about 4 or 5 years in, where I realized I still don't know what I'm doing. And I took a moment, well, I took many moments, because I took the other half of those years to think about, what am I doing? Why do I do any of this that I do when I'm working, when I'm engineering? And to me, that's when I feel like I really started to be an engineer, because I had to learn it all for myself all over again. I had to forget everything that I had learned from everyone else. And I had to only use the things that I knew for sure through my own experience worked. And what I realized was that I was doing way too much. I had way too many things going on that were unnecessary because before I was under the impression of the more elaborate and complex your setup is, like the more next level you are. Because look at this crazy mic chain or vocal chain that I just came up with. I got like 7 plugins on this one vocal. And then you start to take the plugins off, and then you realize, oh, shit, it actually sounds better when you have basically 2 things on it. But after that, after I started to rebuild it for myself, rebuild my own engineer brain, I was more careful. I was more thoughtful and deliberate, and I tried to make everything that I was doing be deliberate and thought out and planned. So that way I'm not wasting time doing things that aren't helping. Once you start doing this all the time and it's your career and it takes up all the hours of your day, it's nice to be able to figure out ways to not take as long so you get some of your time back, some of your life back outside of music. And that was a big thing I had to realize. I'm like, I'm working way too hard at this. So let's see. So here's the thing. People ask me this type of question all the time. And right now, I'm not any official formal teacher, instructor, or anything like that. I'm not well known, really, even in the industry. I don't have much of a platform, but because I do get people asking me, I don't have time to reply to every person individually, to talk with them in person, text back and forth with them individually. So I'm just going to do this episode, and I'll try to this will be the thing that I just point people to. If they ask me that question, I'll just say, hey, listen to this. So here, this is what it's going to be. How do you train yourself to be able to hear a mix? Because there's 2 parts. One part is just the knowledge of what is a good mix. Do you listen to all different types of music, and can you tell somewhat the difference between something that sounds like it's mixed well and something that's not mixed well? Do you even know what that is? Second part is getting your ears trained to be able to hear at a very fine, detailed level. And both of those things are just time and experience of doing it, sitting in front of speakers, listening. And even on a basic level of engineering, just listening in whatever DAW you work in, just say Pro Tools, that if you have a song and you have plugins on it and you start doing stuff to it, what are you actually doing? And what is the point? Because there's the micro and there's the macro. The macro is just the song in the end, the final product that goes out that everyone listens to. And the micro is all the small little parts that make that song up. So we are operating in the micro level, the details of all the individual tracks and getting all those fine details perfectly put in place so that the final result, the macro, is what we are trying to make it sound like. And every decision you have to make has to be in mind. You have to keep in mind both levels, both sides. You have to operate in the micro, but understand on the macro level what is the result of what you're doing. With each decision that you make, is that getting you closer to the finish line of whatever your goal is to make this song sound like? So something is small and maybe seemingly insignificant thing is, what EQ are you going to choose? What type of compressor are you going to choose? What are you going to put on the master bus? These are all things that on their own can be very insignificant, but all these little tiny things that are thousands of tiny little decisions that you make in a song, that's what makes the final macro product. So you can't really think of anything as being small and insignificant. Everything counts. All right. And so this is my approach to what music is. What my opinion is that it is the music listening experience is a sensual experience. Not for everybody. I would say the majority of people, it's a sensual experience, meaning when you're listening to music, you're doing it to be able to feel something with your senses. Mainly your ears. If it's loud, you feel it in your body too. But it's something that you are trying to stimulate your senses positively. You're trying to feel good in whatever makes you feel good musically. So when it comes down to mixing, a lot of thinking and analyzing goes into the process of it. But I'm not mixing to get the song to the point where I think it's right. I'm mixing to the point to where it feels right. So I have to use my analytical brain to figure out the steps of what I'm going to do this mix. But I'm listening on the level of just feeling and no thought to know that if I'm in the right direction or not, and to know if have I gotten to the finish line yet. And for me, yes, I'm sure there's plenty of people that are just very left brain, very analytical, and the music that they listen to is just, that's what they get out of it, they get the thinking analytical kick out of it. And I do too sometimes. That's definitely a side of it. But to me, all that doesn't matter if it doesn't feel good as the foundation, as the start. To me, I say this all the time, but music and food are very similar to me. I approach them and think about them in very, very similar ways, to where if I'm going to go have a meal at a very nice restaurant and they put in all the work and effort to make the meal and even the dining ambiance and everything, the presentation, to make all that look nice and make you think that this is nice. It's prepared where it looks fancy. The serving plates and the silverware and the table and everything looks fancy. Menu looks fancy. Those are all things that make you think this is going to be nice. And then when you take your first bite of the food, then that's really all that matters. Does that taste good or not? Because if the food does not taste good to you, then everything else, all the other effort that they put in, is meaningless. And I've had that experience plenty of times going to restaurants where you just want to have a nice meal. You're willing to just pay extra money to go to some place that's got, 4 or 5 stars on Yelp, which may not be accurate. And yeah, and then you eat the food and I don't feel impressed at all. I don't feel like I want to come back to this restaurant again. I don't feel like I want to tell anybody about this restaurant. Honestly, I'm disappointed. That happens to me a lot. And I think I have high standards, so I'll just say that, but I can be very picky, but I think the thing that really bothers me about that situation is that if they spent less effort on the presentation and the thought out parts of it and just focus more on, does your food actually taste good? Is it well prepared? Is it authentic? Is it balanced? Is it just satisfying? Basically, if that's not the primary concern, and I can tell that, if I can tell that the primary concern of this particular restaurant is not to make the food as good as possible, that really bothers me. Because I don't really care to pay money for ambiance and superficial looks and presentation. And that's how also I feel about music, where I really could care less about the technical aspects of a record if it just doesn't feel good to me. If it doesn't feel good to me, there's no other reason for me to listen to it. But when it has both, when it feels good to me and I can hear that on a technical level, they're doing some amazing stuff, then that's just like, that's over the top for me. Then I love it. And then in the same way that you mix a record and produce a record and all that, same way you prepare a meal where you have to take all these ingredients, separate parts, and you have to prepare them and do things to them to create this balance of flavors and textures that are satisfying to people. We make music for people, we make food for people. So I think it's easy to get caught up because there is so much to think about. It's easy to get caught up in the thinking parts of the process, where that's where the hours and hours of practice come into play, where after a certain point, you've done it enough times, then all these thinking parts just become somewhat automatic. You're somewhat running on autopilot to where you can be doing a lot of steps that are technical steps and processes, but you're able to have that happen in the background of your brain. So that way, most of your attention is to the feeling part of it. That's, to me, what I'm really using as my compass, is the feel. So for me, I want to have as much of my mental capacity focused on just that. And sometimes, well, not sometimes, well, here, in the past year, I guess I've changed a lot to where I've leaned way more towards the feeling, to the point where I can say I can mix something that even if I just think about it totally objectively on a technical level, I can hear stuff that like, maybe that's not great. But because I can get it to the point where to me it feels like what I want it to feel like, that I kind of don't care as much on this technical level. And that's just me. But that's the balance between, I guess, each person of how they're going to do this. How much are you going to lean to one side or the other, or are you going to be balanced? Obviously, being balanced is always good. So, here we go. Meaning I lost my train of thought, and I'm just saying words to keep it going. So, all right, that was a very general overview of my thoughts and opinion on mixing. And for anybody that asked me that question, if I had the time to sit down with you, I guess that would be my intro. So, details. Okay, let's get on to details. Well, here's another thing. Details. Before I get to the details, I mean, most of the time, you're going to be mixing for a client. Someone's going to hire you to mix. Or you could just be mixing your own music, and then that's perfect because no one can tell you anything. But if you're going to do this and get hired and get paid, and you're doing it for somebody else, bottom line is they have to be happy. They're the one paying the money, so it's not about you. It's not about your opinion. It's all about making them happy. Because if this is what you want to do to make money, people won't pay you if they're not getting what they want. Bottom line. So, a big thing that you're going to encounter and have to deal with is your own opinion and feeling about a song and what you think is the right way. And then there's going to be what the client wants, and you got to have to give them what they want as much as possible and figure out a way to sneak in what you want if it's somewhat conflicting with what they want. And that's a Jedi mind trick skill in itself that is required for doing music, is the psychological battle that goes on all the time. And sometimes you got to trick your client. No surprise. Well, maybe surprise to them. But yeah, we're all trying to trick them, basically. And because we are the ones doing the work, I mean, we're the ones that have the skill set and the knowledge, we know how to trick them. Just like an auto mechanic can trick a person that doesn't know anything about cars. Someone that repairs computers, does IT work or whatever. They can trick any person that doesn't know anything about computers. So, but that is the thing, is that you have to figure out how to do what you do and make it work for a client. And it doesn't help at all to be conflicting with your client and confrontational and try to tell them at all what it should be. Hopefully your client knows what they're doing themselves. It makes it a lot easier, but that's not always the case. And sometimes I've had the experience where the client is making it worse. Like they're making the process difficult and drawn out. Like they're indecisive. They might tell you to mix and keep mixing and keep doing all these different versions and drafts and changes, and just because they don't know what they're looking for. And you're just going in circles and circles. And I've done stuff where it's taken weeks and weeks to get a mix done. And what they end up deciding on is going back to an older version from the beginning, where you just feel like you want to slap them and say, "You idiot. It could have been done like a month ago." But yeah, it doesn't really help to slap people. That's really, I wouldn't recommend that. But that's how you feel. And yeah, sometimes it's not a good experience. Well, sometimes it's not a pleasant experience doing this job. But it's always an experience. So as long as there's something to learn and grow from, then it's great. It's a great experience. And I would say in the course of my career, there's been a lot of difficult experiences, which I'm very grateful for. So beyond just sitting down in Pro Tools and mixing records for people or trying to get into that, you also have to develop mental skills that maybe are not so common because working in music is a very specific situation. So being in difficult situations with difficult people, it causes a lot of people to break and give up and quit, which I've seen over the years many, many times. And it's always sad to see that happen, but it's very understandable why it happens. And the people that are still around years, year after year, that are still working and doing music are the people that have dealt with those difficult situations and they've made it through. I mean, they've figured out how to deal with those situations when they occur. They figured out how to avoid those situations. More importantly, just don't work with shitty people if you don't have to. And that is like a very big part that isn't really the part that's talked about, I would say, as much. For people that are new, they don't know these situations that they're going to be in. They just know, oh, there's some technical knowledge I want to gain so I can be able to do this job. So that's the questions that they ask about. But whenever I get a chance to talk to somebody that's new to this, I always find myself going off in this direction of talking about dealing with people in situations that are difficult. Because if you can't deal with that, then you can't stay in the game and then you're done. So it really goes hand in hand. And how do you deal with that? Well, I'm pausing because I'm thinking, because that's a big question. I was working early on a lot of rap sessions, being an engineer for rap sessions for a lot of guys that were just up and coming, not well known yet or ever. But I hated it at the time. Those were some of the worst sessions I've ever had to do because people were rude. They were not educated as far as just common etiquette of working in a studio and being a professional person and talking to people and just not being an asshole. And it would just be a party. People would invite everybody they knew to come to the studio and party, basically, and just smoke a million blunts and drink alcohol and lean. Meanwhile, they're trying to make songs and they're just giving you a bunch of beats to load up, and they're going in the booth and they're recording and everyone's being loud and you're trying to hear, and you try to ask people to keep it down so you can hear what's going on because you're the engineer that's recording and trying to make it sound like what they're asking you to sound like. And if you can't hear because everyone's like having a party in the control room, that really sucks and nobody cares, so no one's going to be quiet. And plus they're going to go until like the sun comes up and not give you a chance to like take a break to do anything because there might be, it's a whole party, it's a whole room full of people. So you just literally, okay, this sounds fucked up, but they're just running a train on you musically. It's just one person will work, then the next person works, the next person, and the next person does a verse, the next person, then load up the next beat, and the next. So it just goes all night because the people individually, they get their own break. They're only putting in like 20, 30 minutes to work at a time, but you as the engineer don't get that break. You just keep going. You gotta basically just, when it's time that you have to go to the bathroom because you're about to explode, you have to. Sometimes I just get up and I'm just like, I'm leaving. I don't ask. I don't say anything. I just get up and I leave because that's just what I got to do. Or if I'm starving because I've been in there for 6, 7 hours straight, I got to get up and I got to leave and I got to eat something. So sometimes if you don't have that opportunity, I just have to get up and leave. And then, of course, they want their vocals and the songs to sound like it's like a final mix as they're recording. So it's ridiculous demands. And I can go on and on. Long story short, a lot of shitty times. But I had a lot of those shitty times. And I had to grow this thick shell around myself to be able to deal with it and realize, well, this is how I'm paying the rent. So I could do this and pay the rent, or I could not and not pay the rent, or I can quit doing music and get a job that's just a job. But I decided I got to just keep going further into it instead of trying to run away from it. So I just developed this thick shell to where I could just, I don't know, in a bad way, a little bit be numb to it. So I can just be in these situations and not be affected and not let myself get upset and bothered and be stressed out and all that. And then what I did also was just take all that time to practice my skills in Pro Tools of recording, figuring out faster, easier, more efficient ways to record and edit songs, and how to really figure out what type of mixing chains do I want to use on music and vocals and things like that, and figure out what's what's an efficient way to do anything. What sounds good, what sounds like what they want it to sound like. How can I dial that in? And after a few years of doing that, I had realized that all that time had actually turned into useful experience and knowledge for me. Because after that, I started working with people that were much cooler, that were people I actually enjoyed working with. And I had this knowledge and skills to be able to do my job better, so that the new clients that I had that were nice people, were happy with me. And that helped me get out of that situation to where I was doing sessions primarily that were with nice people. And that only came from me sticking with it and figuring out, okay, I'm in shitty situation, but what can I do to make something good out of this time? And I didn't fully understand that as I was going through it. I just was like, well, I can't really quit because I don't have a choice, because I got bills to pay. So fuck it. But I did realize later on, a few years later, that, hey, I'm good at my job now because I had all that practice time doing those shitty sessions. So when you're new and you're in situations like that, you just got to know that every step of the way of this whole career, it's all about what you do, how you build, what you do with your time, what you do with your experience, what you do with your skills to help you create and shape the career that you want for yourself, because that's all you get is what you create for yourself in this. No one's giving you promotions, no one's giving you a raise, like no one's elevating you except you. Everyone's going to put you, if you leave it up to chance or whatever out external circumstance to shape what your career is going to be, it's probably most likely not going to be good, because nobody's looking to help you out. Everybody needs an engineer, but everybody's mostly looking for an engineer that will charge them less than what you're asking for. So everyone's, everyone's looking out for themselves, which is fine. But that just means like that's what you have to do also. You have to understand how to do that, because still to this day, I hate having to deal with negotiating and money and talking about stuff like that. But that's the uncomfortable thing that you have to deal with, because no one else is going to do it for you, and everyone else is trying to take advantage of you. So you just have to understand every step of the way. Everything is up to you and how you deal with it and how you shape your own career. So maybe that was a big tangent, but I think that's very important because, like I said, it's only when you can learn to mentally deal with difficult situations can you get to the other side of it, to get to the good situations. And in order to be able to maintain these good situations, you have to be good at your job. So it works twofold. Deal with shitty situations, come through, overcome them with skills and experience to use at the next stage, next level. All right. So, hope some of that has been interesting for you, any of you listening. Insightful, useful, whatnot. Oh, man. Yeah. Mixing, working in music, being a music professional, I feel, is at most 50% of it is actually working on music. At the most. And the other half is just dealing with people. Dealing with personalities, dealing with egos, dealing with your own personality and ego. Very, very important. Being real with yourself, very, very important. Because you got to know when you're shooting yourself in the foot. You got to know when you're making things worse for yourself, when you're being your own enemy through your own ego, through laziness, through stubbornness, through whatever. I can look back at every year of my career and see a version of myself where I was doing things that were making things harder for myself. And I look back and then I learn from that. I get slight improvements, but I know now for sure that I'll always have something for myself to improve on, just on a personal level, to be able to get to a higher level of my career. I can always keep improving at my job as an engineer on a technical level. Also, that's important too. But if I'm not improving just as a person, as a responsible person, then skills alone are not going to get you to the next level if you don't know how to be like an intelligent, responsible person and go about your business, because this is your business, because you're independent. There's no salary job for being someone's mix engineer. There's no promotion. There's no company healthcare program, 401k. There's just you on your own. Once you get to a higher level, then you can have like a manager or an assistant or something like that, and then you have some type of support. But up until then, it's just all on you. So how do you mix, huh? Well, spend hours and hours practicing it. 10,000 hours, 10 years. That sounds accurate to me as a starting point. Get to that point. And then maybe you can start to say you know how to mix. But start at a very basic, fundamental level. just use basic EQs, basic compressors, so that you can just learn what do those tools even do. What is the point of those, the most fundamental tools in mixing and engineering? What is the point of what you are trying to do when you're trying to balance frequencies and dynamics of sounds that are making up this song? What role does panning play? We have two speakers. Music is made in a stereo field, left and right. What's the point of having a left and a right side of panning stuff? Somewhere off to one side or another, or being right in the middle? What difference does that make? What difference does balance of volume make to the song? Part of that is just, I would say, producer preference, producer/artist preference. I mean, that has to be kind of come from them. That's how I usually go about it, is that it's their song and the perspective of the levels of everything relative, the different instrument levels and the vocals. That's, to me, that's just personal preference of the client, of how they want it. But there's adjustments you make within that, just volume alone, that you can still give them what they want, but you can make small adjustments that help it just sound better, whatever that means. But if you can't work with just basic volume, panning, EQ, compression, and maybe just a reverb, a basic reverb, if you can't make a mix sound good just with those basic things, then don't move on to trying to learn other stuff yet. Don't try to move on to using something like Ozone that has, it's like a mastering suite plugin that has multi-band compression and dynamic EQ and imaging and exciters and all these other things. That stuff, it's a nice tool to have. I use once you know how to use it, then it's awesome. But if you can't say that you fully understand mixing choices and decisions based on those fundamental things of volume, pan, EQ, compression, and reverb, if you can't make that work yet, then you're not ready to move on. So start with that. Understand when you make an EQ decision on a track or the master or whatever, and you are bypassing that and you're A-Bing it on and off, and you're listening to the difference that you're making, you have to be able to listen to it honestly and say, is that making it better? Is that making this move forward towards the finish line or not? Because it's easy to assume something you're doing is making it better. I've done that plenty of times over the years, where I assumed certain things that I would like to do were always adding and making things better. And then I would hit a point where I would hear that same thing that I had been doing. It might be like an EQ preset or something like that, or just a plugin preset. And I would listen to it, and all of a sudden I would just hear it different. And I would realize, that's actually making it worse. I'm taking away from the mix instead of improving on it. And that might be something that I had been doing for a year or two or something like that. And I say, oh shit, I've been fucking up this whole time. Well, scratch that one off the list, or just figure out how to just make the adjustment to like, okay, what is that actually about this that's wrong or that's not working? And then adjust it. And then coming to the realization to myself that I had a lot of false assumptions in my head about what I was doing, about things that I was doing that I thought I was good at, realizing that actually I'm not good at that. And that kind of honesty with yourself, being able to say, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. So how can I figure out how to know what I'm doing? Even after you've already been doing it 10 years like me, which is like 10 years, it's a long time, but it's also not a long time. I mean, there's plenty of people that have just 10, 20 plus years more than me that are still doing it. So this never ends. Never ends. But I think it's important to just do things in a way that makes sense, which is to focus on the fundamental things about it. And as you learn and understand the fundamental levels, then you go up and then you learn more complex things and more and more and more and more. But if you try to just cram too many things in at once, that can be confusing too. Like, the world of plugins is awesome because there's just a never-ending supply of plugins and tools and cool things that you can use. And once you start to compile a bunch of these, and all of a sudden your plugin list is just super long, that can be detrimental too. Let's say I want to EQ something, and then you open up your list of EQs, and you're like, there's like 100 in there. 100 different EQs. Which one should I use? And that time that you spend thinking about, which one should I use? That's going to slow you down. If that's what you got to do all the time, on the regular. Every time you're going to pull up an EQ, and you're going to go back to your long list, and you're going to look them over. And because what's going to happen is, like, you're going to basically just get to a point where you figure out there's a few that you like for specific purposes that work for you. So in the end, you don't need, I have, out of all the plugins that I own, because I buy them now, out of all the ones that I own, at least half of them I never touch or use. I just bought them because at the time, maybe they were on sale or something or whatever. I got an email blast and I saw it and that looks cool. I'll probably use that sometime. Might as well get it. And then it just becomes crazy. And then I find myself every once in a while having to clean house where I have to take plugins off of my computer because the ones that I know I just never use, they're just taking up mental space for me when I go to that plugin list. So it's easier just to once I know for sure what I like and I don't like, I just put it away sometimes. It's good to leave it in sometimes because every once in a while, you'll just say, hey, fuck it, whatever. Let me just try something random. And you pick one of those plugins that you never use, and then maybe you find out that you have a really cool use for it. Balance. It's a balance of this stuff of leaving yourself open to be able to have happy accidents, but also being kind of clean and organized that make your workflow easier. And happy accidents, I love those. Try to make those happen as much as possible. And I think an important part about that is not being too tied into a certain process and template and steps and this is my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step process of doing a mix or engineering or just whatever. One thing I like about my approach to sitting down and saying I don't know what I'm doing whenever I'm going to mix is that you leave that back door unlocked for these happy accidents to walk through. And then and then it's nice. You just hear knocking, you hear the door creak, you hear footsteps, and you're like, oh shit, someone's stuck in my house. And you're like, no, it's me, happy accident. And you're like, oh, welcome back. That was stupid. Sorry about that. Okay. I reached the end of my discussion. So, thank you for listening. That was a Talk Like No One's Listening episode 20, I believe. That's what I said before. And if any of this was useful information for you, then cool. I hope it was. That was the whole point of me talking this long. And if you want to contact me, go ahead. How do you do that? I don't know. Internet, look me up. The podcast, I guess there's a Twitter I've made at some point. There's probably an email I've made at some point. You could figure it out, find it, or I don't know. TLNOL podcast@gmail, maybe? I don't know. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.